Data Storytellers. Today on the show, I have with me Jendrik Timm. Jendrik is the head of data at RTL, which is, I think, the #1 media company over at the Netherlands or Holland, whatever rows your boat. It might be geographically not accurate, but you can use either. And Jendrik is actually originally from Germany. So first of all, Jendrik, welcome on the show.
Well, nice to have you. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So we actually recorded a data story with you, which is very exciting, and some of our members will have the opportunity to dive into that. But today we will have a casual conversation around different topics in data-driven transformation. So first of all, Jendrik, you do have quite a colorful background. Would you mind just maybe introducing yourself and what really brought you into the world of data?
Sure, of course. So my name is Jendrik. I'm from Hamburg in Germany originally, and I always had a passion for media. So that's also how it started. And I studied business administration and media management in Hamburg and London. And then I moved to a publishing house where I started working in the M&A department. So that's already where kind of media and data crossed my path, and where I was working on business plans and evaluations of companies. And then I actually had an offer to go to the Netherlands, which I never expected before. But RTL offered me to work in their corporate strategy department. So also there, I was working on acquisitions and strategy. And maybe what's most important is that back then RTL was already in a digital transformation. So it's, as you mentioned, the largest TV broadcaster in the Netherlands. But of course, Netflix was already back then launching in the US. And we also started our own subscription VOD service, video on demand. So had our own service. I was writing the business case for that. And this was extremely exciting. Also developing the content strategy in the beginnings and really kind of learning the whole business model from scratch. And then after a couple of years, I realized, well, okay, the business really going well now. It has a clear strategic path, and I felt a little distance. I thought like, okay, the real stuff is happening on the work floor. I want to be part of the operation. I want to be closer to the fire of the daily digital dynamics. And I started leading the analytics team of our video on demand platform. And just almost 3 years ago, within the whole company, where we're merging 3 different data teams. So my team from the VOD part with 2 other teams that were kind of dispersed across the organization. And we were creating one data unit, and that's how I got there where I am right now.
Okay, very interesting. And then basically during that journey, what were your biggest challenges? And that's a big question, so maybe we can explore certain areas, but just kind of moving from management consulting and working with corporate strategy, as you transition into the world of data, and there are many, many connection points between the business and analytical capabilities, but what was the most difficult part of that? What did you have the most challenge with?
So for me personally, I have a business background. So I'm not a studied data scientist, or I have no real technical background. And that was clearly something where I had to learn a lot, especially in the beginning, and then where I'm still learning on a daily basis. So this was my personal challenge in that sense. And then I think within our company, you see 2 different business models, a traditional core business and a new thriving native digital business. And to kind of find the right balance there. On the one hand, it's about getting really advanced in analytics. On the other side, you have to really build the fundamentals. And I think that change process was really challenging in the beginning, because of course there are people working for decades in the company, and they have been doing the certain processes, and to kind of spark their interest in a data-driven approach and kind of move away from gut feeling. I mean, you have to imagine it's a media company is a creative company. There are a lot of people running around who have creative ideas, who exactly know what people want to watch on TV, and they are taking a lot of decisions from the gut feeling and from their intuition. And then suddenly I think sometimes people felt offended when you said, well, we have a lot of data, you might use that for decision making. And I think kind of to start that change process and kind of try to change the mindsets of colleagues, that is challenging in the beginning.
And do you see a growing influence of data and analytics professionals in these big organizations like yours? So just since you've been there, it's basically 10 years. Have you seen an increasing emphasis and focus on implementing data analytics into everyday business processes?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the company is totally different from 10 years ago. And we've come a long way, but a lot of things have been really changing. It really starts with basics, I mean, if we're talking about increasing data maturity in the company, it's also about giving people access to data and also showing them as an example what you can actually accomplish by doing analytics based on data, and that you can actually make better decisions ultimately.
And from your experience, because I mean, this is still new to companies, even though we've been riding the wave of the hype for a while. I think it's just sinking in, like what analytics can do and the immense potential in that. Now, there's still a lot of realignment that needs to take place in terms of changing culture in the businesses. I mean, ultimately, culture is a set of behaviors and beliefs. So it all boils down to influence at the end of the day. How can you influence people? So from your perspective, what are the best ways for data analytics leaders to really gain more influence within the organization?
Yeah, there are a couple of points, I think. I think what really helps is to understand the challenges of the business. And you can kind of also speak the business language. So if you understand the challenge of the business, what people want to achieve there and what are their goals, you can really kind of shape your own storyline to that and show them in examples how they can accomplish their goals by working more data driven and how they can better accomplish those goals actually. So I think that kind of skill to talk the business language and to have an understanding for the challenges there, that really helps. And then of course you can organize a lot of things around it and not only, let's say, communicate directly to leadership, but in the broader sense in the organization. So what we've been doing, for example, was founding a data academy. And that data academy has three different roles. So on the one hand, we want to inspire, we want to inform people, and we also want to educate them. So on the inspiring part, it's really about inviting external speakers who talk about really fancy, cool data stories like artificial intelligence, what you can do with that, how you do content recommendations and so on, for example. Then the informing part is really kind of explaining the techniques behind it, how things are actually working. And then the last bit is educate. So we are offering a lot of courses, workshops. People learn how to use certain BI tools like Tableau in our case, or how they can even do data selections on a database. And I think that's really kind of the combination of these three things that helps to stimulate people and to make them enthusiastic about data and to involve data more in their daily business life.
And what kind of results you've been seeing from this? So was it difficult to gain traction when you launched this initiative and you said, okay, now we have this great vision of educating the business, making everyone data literate, or actually how it's better to position it data fluent? People have less of a knee-jerk reaction to that, but it's ultimately the same thing. So was it hard to gain traction? And then what were the most difficult parts of actually getting that thing going?
So of course, I was not always in the role which I'm right now. So of course, I think when I'm looking back 10 years ago, we were also organized in a different way. We also had different processes. We were at a totally different level. What I can tell from that time as an observer was it was really challenging because we had, let's say, a data hub with really sophisticated data experts, but who were not really let's say, part of the business. They could not take the perspectives of the business sufficiently and kind of connect with the business. And on the other hand, we had a business that for some part, at least in the core business, was fully let's say, blank on data and how to use that. So one side, let's say the data hub was expecting business questions. Come on, just ask me things and I can give you answers. And the business just said, well, okay, there are sitting data experts. I have no idea how they could help me. And that was kind of like the clash. And there was a mismatch, and it was difficult really to gain traction. But this has been changing over the years, I have to say. And what you see, of course, I think the inspiration part really helps. Of course, not only within our company, but in our daily life, we see a lot of cool things about artificial intelligence, about machine learning, things that are really, inspiring. So you also want to learn more about that. So we see often, also in the beginning, of course, let's say our auditorium filling up with people to kind of watch these inspiring sessions. However, when it was about, okay, let's learn SQL kind of to make your data selection on our database, then the room was a bit emptier. But this has been changing over time, as we could show examples that it's actually not that complex and that you can achieve a lot of things yourself with actually also some basic skills in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And if you think about this transformation in a holistic way, well, first I have a few questions around that, especially your perspective as someone who's been there and saw all that develop. So do you think that the change came mainly from up top, or was it driven from the front lines with the actual users? Maybe middle management played the most critical role. Where do you see the responsibilities?
I have to say, I would say it was rather bottom up in our case. Mm-hmm. And I think the advantage we had was that we had our digital business, the video on demand business, which was from scratch data driven from the beginning, because we also had a very young workforce who came with those skills immediately from university, and the whole culture, also the way of working, let's say the agile structure, everything was already, let's say, in place that enabled a data driven way of working. And for a long time, of course, it was kind of ignored by the core business because it was this tiny digital part, and let's say the big TV business was still the huge driver, and that changed over time because we could see the digital business growing rapidly and really successfully, and suddenly it was really sexy in the company, and everyone wanted to be part of that, and you could really feel the vibe in that team. And so I think that was also a big reason why in the core business people wanted to change. And they saw, well, I don't want to be part of, let's say, have the image like I'm the leftover and the one that is the dinosaur that's kind of not changing. So I think there is a strong will also to change in the company. Yeah.
And so you were the head of strategy and data analytics, and then you had another role, head of data. So in all this transformation, where did you spend most of your time and focus? Was it, I don't know, finding new technologies and working on the technical implementation? Was it about really understanding people and engaging them, talking to them, communicating to them? Was it about just establishing good processes to implement and then run efficiently? Maybe a mixture of these. Like where were your key focus areas?
Yeah. So my focus was very much on communication and building bridges between data and business, because that's where we were clearly lacking skill sets and also the communication paths, let's say, to really gain traction. So luckily we have a tech department who are supporting us in also selecting certain tools. But also there we have been maturing. So within my team, I also have, of course, a lot of experts who can take decisions in that field. And I think the key was really communication with the business, but also within the team to make, let's say, the data experts also give them, let's say, the feeling for the business, so they also understand what's really driving value ultimately.
So you mentioned communication with the business and the team. So maybe let's look at the business first. So You do have a more business-oriented background, of course, and from our experience, people who do have that can bring a lot of insights into that field that is usually more technological, more statistical, more on the what we call the cold cognitive communication style. And then to actually inspire people and get through to them, you need more hot cognitive techniques and methods, and also a nice and healthy amalgamation of that, when you can actually back up your exciting visions with cold, hard logic. So from your perspective, during this whole transformation, what were the keys for you to communicate effectively with the business and really win those hearts and minds?
I think it was really practical examples, really showcases to prove that we can add more value to the business when we're doing stuff data driven. I think that was one point, and of course it's not only me. I think we have a great data team of experts who are far from being cold. So I think that's also key. To hire data talent that is able to communicate, that has also certain soft skills. I think that's one of the keys to success. And we also, of course, see the talent changing that sense. I think when I think back a decade or more, I think there was also this image of those data nerds kind of sitting in the dark room. And that has been fundamentally changing. There's a lot of talent coming from universities who already have like a crossover knowledge on and skills on business and data, and so this has been totally changing. And I think that's also a big factor for success, that people also within the teams can directly connect with other colleagues in the business.
And now that we're talking about the team, so how important was it for you guys to give an inspiring vision for the data team, and to always have kind of like a mission that they can look forward to and really invest themselves in? And what were the keys for you to really make sure that whatever you're trying to communicate and achieve is internalized by your team members?
That's a very good point, because this was challenging. So when the three different data teams were kind of merged into one, there was also not a lot of communication around it from the board, let's say. So a lot of people were wondering, like, what am I doing here? Why did we actually do this? I don't know, does my job change or whatever? So we had to really create our own identity as a team, to really define that together. And therefore, we were using workshops in the group to define our own mission statement, indeed, as you said. And we were working on that in groups. So it was not top down, but it was really coming from the teams. We were defining the core values of our team, what makes us stand out maybe compared to other disciplines within the company, and what makes us unique. And also to define our goals. What do we want to accomplish as a group together, independent from in which business unit you might be sitting. So this was a really a good exercise. And just to give an example of that, our mission statement was, we empower our data-driven culture. And I think that still stands today, 3 years later. That really explains what we are working for within RTL.
So you mentioned core values, which I find very important always, because when we talk about the ideal data transformation leader and what kind of qualities that person embodies to make sure that the business follows his lead and also his team can really buy into his vision and leadership, you need to embody some of those, what we call virtues, right? The ancient Greeks called virtues, basically habits of character. So this is closely tied to the core values. So what kind of core values did you guys prioritize when really working on giving the team a sense of mission and purpose?
Yeah, so one of is curiosity. So I think it really helps to be curious, not about as a data analyst, let's say, to kind of find the insight in the numbers, but also maybe to understand the business perspective. Taking other people's perspectives really helps. So curiosity is one. Another one was, for example, to be daring, to dare, because what we also see a lot of work, especially in the digital space, but probably in any space, is trial and error. We have to do A/B testing. We have to do try new stuff. The digital environment is really dynamic, so we have to test and fail fast. I mean, it almost sounds like a cliche that you read on LinkedIn, but it's true to some extent. So you have to dare making mistakes, and I think that's really important for the culture as well. So dare in combination with being open and transparent, also about your failures. So having a clear failure culture of failing is also important. It's not about like doing everything perfect, but yeah, let's just try things out and analyze them in a scientific way based on data rules, and then take a decision.
So when you talk about like being daring and at the same time being curious, so curiosity is more like be open and absorb information, ask the right questions. And being daring, that's like more assertive. That's more about, okay, look, you got to take chances, you got to try things, you got to bruise your knees sometimes. And then if you zoom out a little bit, you can see that on one hand, it's almost like you need to be humble and you need to really embody the virtue of humility so that you can be genuinely and authentically curious, but at the same time, assertiveness, so you have the courage and the fortitude to drive things forward when that is your responsibility. So how do you balance those two? I know that it's personal for everyone, but it's both a science and an art. But which one of those do you think is more important, and how can data leaders really combine those two? It's kind of like nitro and glycerin. They are harmless by themselves, but when you combine, it can be explosive in a good way. So what are your thoughts about that?
I don't know if you have to balance them, because I also don't see a contradiction between those two. So I think you can do both in the same time, and if you're doing it the right way, then it's magic. So yeah, I think that's it. It's also sometimes following your intuition on that part. Yeah.
Okay, yes, I didn't want to lead the witness, but that's actually what we found, is that the contradiction is actually not a contradiction. So it's always about, the right combination of those two. And then I wanted to ask something about you mentioned, so the curiosity bit and empathy. So for you guys, from your experience, what were the best ways to make sure that you're building the right solutions for the right people at the right time? One of the biggest risks for data analytics practitioners is when you invest into a project, it costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time, you build up all these expectations and promises, and then you build something shiny and amazing that you basically build a Ferrari, you can know that it can go like 300 miles an hour, but then no one ends up driving it, no one ends up using it. So what were the keys for you guys to make sure that you don't bark up the wrong tree, and that you can actually connect to the business in a meaningful way and build the right solutions for the right people at the right time?
Yeah, it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but of course it's about communication and a good link to the business. So I think really constant stakeholder management is key. That you're in a constant dialogue with the business, and of course, and that's what you learn in an agile environment. You're fighting for priorities on the roadmap and the backlog for things to being realized. So you really have to be in that dialogue, and also to show like what is maybe the right thing from a data perspective, but it has to match the needs from a business perspective. And if you're creating alignment with your business stakeholders on that, I think then it's really a lot easier to implement things. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. It's never easy to implement a lot of infrastructure or to migrate databases from one to the other, but it really helps to be in constant dialogue and creating alignment with other stakeholders. So they also support you in implementing the things you need from a data perspective.
That makes perfect sense. And when it comes to these key stakeholders, just a quick question on the practical examples that you mentioned that were key to really communicate effectively with the business itself. So, of course, we are the data storytellers. So I would be curious about your take on storytelling itself. Like, how important was that? Was that even intentional that, okay, now guys, we need to tell powerful stories, or you just ended up actually bringing some examples through storytelling? So what do you think about the importance of that, and what were your best practices in making sure that you delivered impactful stories to the right people?
Yeah, so for me personally, it helped, of course, my background in a strategy consultancy and also in the working in the M&A department, where you had to pitch things, but also, for example, present to a management board. Management board usually doesn't have much time and wants all the facts and the essence of a topic, and also ultimately the positive outcome. What's in it for us? What are we earning with it? So I think to create really catchy, maybe even short storylines and stories that indicate what the positive impact is of something that you can implement, and maybe to embed that in a bigger picture where the whole company is moving towards in the next years. So, I mean, at the, let's say, very generic level, all companies are kind of sharing the same challenges. We have been seeing the whole business environment becoming more data-driven over the past years. We have been seeing global tech giants arising and dominating certain market segments. And all the other players who are not a huge tech player are fighting with that and have to come up with their own solutions. At the same time, we see a lot of data tools at our hands that we can use. A lot of things in the data ecosystem have become more accessible and more affordable also. And there's, of course, there's a lot of scarcity in the talent market right now. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of new talent, fresh talent, and even more talent coming from universities. So there's also an opportunity. And I think if you embed your storyline within those meta trends, that also helps a lot to get things done and to get your requests approved.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is such a good way to look at it, as like you got to pitch these ideas. People kind of shy away from the notion of having to sell something, but in today's world especially, it's been always like this, but maybe now is just even more important because of the shrinking attention span, because we are just constantly bombarded by different messages, and you just got to be more powerful in your communication to actually grab people's attention and be able to get through these messages. And this is what we found, that people who actually used to pitch projects, venture capitalists even, do like an amazing job at driving transformation, even when their, let's say, technological knowledge might not be in the top like 10% of the industry, 100%. And what are you guys, so what are you most excited about right now in the world of data analytics? And maybe you can, if you want, you can even talk
maybe one more point.
Sure.
Storytelling, because I
just got the thought when you were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually people with a data background have a huge advantage to make great pitches. I mean, of course, you have to maybe learn on the emotional side, but what really helps, especially let's say in top management, is rational arguments and based on data. So you can also make your own data work to get decisions being approved. And I think that's the most forceful combination. If you're having a good storyline, let's say with meta trends that is catching also emotionally, and you combine that with facts and figures and data insights, then yeah, who would not approve your request then? So I think that's the best combination.
Absolutely. Actually, this is exactly why we have the logo that we have, like the right brain and the left brain, the more creative side of the brain that deals with the hot cognitive elements, and then the cold cognitive brain, the left brain, which is all about logic and numbers and statistics, which actually just make up the human decision-making process. Because when you make a decision, let's say you want to buy a pair of shoes and you scroll through Amazon or whatever your platform of choice is, and something catches your eye, you love the shoe, you love the design, you love the color, you imagine how it will look on you, what your friends would think, and how amazing it would feel to run through the tracks in that shoe. So you emotionally buy into the shoe. But before actually making that decision, you start like digging into the specs. What kind of material the sole is made of? Will this be durable? But these are actually questions after you've already made the decision in your heart that you already bought into the shoe, right? But you need to justify that decision. And actually, I agree with you 100% that data analytics practitioners really have that second bit, the justification part, going for them, and it's kind of served up on a silver platter. So if you manage to nail the hot cognitive piece, and again, you should only focus on the 20% of the things that you can do that will give you 80% of the results. You don't need to become like the Wolf of Wall Street to be able to sell an idea, right? But combined together, it's extremely powerful. So I agree with you 100%. And just back to that question of mine, if we kind of exhausted the storytelling, but it's hard to exhaust it, but because of the scope of the conversation, we can only
At least
go
I
so
know
far.
now what your logo means. So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, exactly. It's just intriguing, but sometimes I lift the veil. Sometimes I open the kimono and just tell you guys and explain what's happening there. But in terms of the industry, so a lot of exciting things are happening. Everyone says that this will be the decade of data, and as such, we know that there will be a lot of losers, a lot of winners, and many people in between, caught up in between. But what are you most excited about right now in the world of data and analytics? And maybe if you would like, you can bring something from RTL as well. I don't know if you guys are working on something super exciting that you would like to maybe introduce to the audience.
Yeah, well, there are so many things to be excited about, and I think even the most data averse people really realize now they have to engage with data, and that helps a lot in driving that whole thing forward. What I'm excited about is, of course, the whole future of artificial intelligence and what's happening in that field. It's really entering the mainstream, and also within our company, we have a great team of data scientists who are building data models. And for example, you can do a lot of AI intelligence on video content, for example. So we are automatically selecting certain video snippets to produce promotional videos and so on. So there's a lot of information to extract from video content, actually, which we were not able to do, let's say, a couple of years before. And on the other hand, that's, let's say, the artificial intelligence is really like the sophisticated thing. On the other hand, what I'm really excited about is the democratization of data, so that every employee within a company has access to data, and that it's kind of becoming a common thing to have a look at the data and to do your own analysis and really base your decision making wherever you work on your own data sets. And I think that's really exciting.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about all these opportunities in AI, the availability of data, also even people's behaviors and habits of using technology, as everything expands, the opportunities are really limitless. Now, at the same time, we do have things that might be less inspiring, things like, let's say, data privacy or data ethics. Now, what we've seen is that in preparation for that, and it's already kind of happening, data analytics practitioners take different approaches of dealing with that. Some people are focusing on defensive warfare, right? And some people like to be more proactive with maybe getting ahead of that curve and taking control of the narrative. So I don't think we've spoken about this before, but what are your thoughts about the changes in how data privacy is being viewed both on the governmental and corporate level, and in the question of data ethics, maybe if you have some thoughts?
So I don't think it's a boring topic. I think it's an extremely exciting topic as well, because I'm German, and I have to say data security and data privacy is a huge topic there, also historically. And I think what's happening, I mean, I mostly have a view also on the European market, and there's a lot of regulation happening on EU level. And I think it's really exciting what's happening there. And of course, I'm also looking from a consumer perspective. Me as a consumer, I don't want to share my data with any random party. And I mean, the bad thing is, well, if I knew with which party I'm actually sharing data when I'm clicking on a consent wall, but behind that wall, suddenly my data is being shared with more than 1,000 other companies, which I'm not really aware of. So I think that a lot of things have to change there and improve for consumers, certainly. And I see, of course, we all see a clear trend towards more restrictive data privacy regulation, and I think it's the right way. And companies have to find ways to cope with that. Of course, in a legal way, but you can still get creative then to still extract insights from the data you have, but not necessarily one-on-one, let's say, matchable private data.
100%. And so in all that, if you look at the aspiring data leaders of the future, based on your experience and your journey, what would be your top recommendations for them?
Sorry, may I just add another thing?
Sure.
Because we were talking about ethics, and
Mm-hmm.
and data privacy is of course one part of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're looking at artificial intelligence,
Mm.
there's also a lot of more ethics is playing maybe even a more vital role in that. And I think that's also really exciting, and that also will become a huge challenge. I think predominantly also for regulators, because these things have to be regulated. Otherwise, these things or certain algorithms will have a tremendous effect, a tremendous negative effect on society. So I think this is also one of the most exciting topics, I think, for the next years, how we deal with algorithms and their effect on society.
And then what do you think is the responsibility and role of corporate data leaders in making sure that this whole thing does not go south, or that, you know, it will be still viewed in a favorable light and it will produce value in a healthy way to society? Do you think there is such responsibility? And if so, how do you see the role of data leaders?
Of course. So I think it's clear that companies have the responsibility and also have to take the responsibility to also have their own a set of values in terms of ethics, and to kind of apply these when they're building algorithms themselves. And of course, it's there's a, let's say, the challenge will be, on the one hand, you also want to experiment, so you have to try stuff. It's also there, it applies trial and error. But when you see that an algorithm has a negative effect in any extent, then I think you have to also regulate yourself. However, yes, companies have to take their own responsibility, but I wouldn't leave it to them, because I don't think all companies probably will do that. I think the regulators play an important role in this as well.
And then when we talk about the responsibility of corporate data leaders, now looking for the future, what would be your top recommendations for them? Like the aspiring data practitioners really want to leave a mark and make an impact. What should they prioritize, and what should they focus on in order to be successful?
I think what we were talking about before. I think storytelling is the key, and I'm not saying this because this podcast is called like this.
Thank you for plugging us, though. And
but of course, I think there's a lot of talent and a lot of skills and knowledge in the market. But I think you can only make a difference when you're able to communicate your own vision and your plans to the people who have to buy them. And for that, I think that is a vital skill you need as a data leader.
Well, amen. And Jendrik, keep sharing the gospel of this, because I think it will be like increasingly important. We appreciate you. We appreciate your insights always, you know, when you share, whether it's a data story or a podcast. And thank you very much for coming on the show. And we look forward to having you on, maybe in some different capacity in the not too distant future.
Well, thanks for having me.